When working with columns, it's important to understand that there are two categories for columns. Let's take a look in this simple exercise file. Here I have two columns, and when I select the column on the left, you can see that it belongs to the structural columns category. And when I select the column on the right, you can see that it belongs to the columns category. Additionally, on the Architecture tab in the Build panel, there's a column split button. And when you expand the split button, you can see two tools, Structural Column and Column Architectural. When you place columns using the Structural Column tool, they will be created in the Structural Column category, whereas the columns created using the Column Architectural tool will be added to the Columns category. So, once again, the Structural Column tool to place structural columns, and then the Column Architectural tool to place columns. Now, a couple differences in how they behave in the model. A structural column is simply a structural column. It really doesn't integrate much with architectural components. Whereas if I select an architectural column and place it in the wall here, it actually takes on the layer materials of the wall type. So as you can see right here, I'm placing it inside this brick on metal stud wall, and it's actually taking on those layer materials. So that's something you need to be aware of. That may or may not be what you want to have happen in your model. And so you need to be aware of those differences between structural columns and architectural columns. I'm going to switch to another exercise file and we'll take a look at placing columns. I will go back to the Architecture tab, and in the Build panel, I'll expand the Column Split button and select Column Architectural. And when I do, you can see there are a few options here on the options bar. I can choose either height or depth. And then, so for this example, I'll leave it set to height so that I extend up from the current level. And then I can specify the height. I can choose a specific level, or I can select unconnected and then control the column height. So whichever option you choose there will determine the height. And then architectural columns can be room bounding. And then you can simply click to place a column, and you can also press the spacebar to rotate the column in 90-degree increments before placing it. And as with many components in Revit, you can choose various types and create new types as needed. I will click Modify to end the command, and then I will click Structural Column to activate the Place Structural Column tool. On the options bar, we have the same options, and I will select height again, and I'm going to constrain it to level 2 so that the column goes from level 1, which is the current level, up to level 2. Now for structural columns, there are some additional options on the contextual ribbon tab. For example, in the placement panel, we can choose to place either a vertical column or a slanted column. I'll leave it set to vertical column, and then we'll come back to these other options here in a minute. Once again, you can choose a type in your type selector and press the spacebar to rotate the column in 90-degree increments, and then simply click to place it. But the cool thing with structural columns is that you can place them at grid intersections. So in the multiple panel, I'll click at grids, and now I can select grid lines. I can select them individually, or I can even use a window to select grid lines. And I'll press Control and make sure I select them all. And I can tell that they're selected because they're highlighted. And then once they are all selected, I can actually see a preview of the structural columns at those grid intersection locations. And once again, I can press the spacebar to rotate them in 90-degree increments. And then once I'm satisfied with their location, I can click Finish. And now all of those structural columns are placed at once. So that's a quick way to place multiple structural columns. And if you're also using architectural columns, you can use the Add Architectural Columns option, and then simply select architectural columns, and structural columns will be placed inside of those architectural columns. Then once again, you can select one or many and then click Finish, and they will be placed. And then click Modify to end the command. So as you can see, several options there to place either structural columns or architectural columns, and whichever one you use just depends on how you want them to behave in your project.